All right. Who here remembers their first time seeing the Rocky Horror Picture Show? This is the audience participation. Excellent. Mine was April 24th, 2004. I was 14 years old, a fresh-faced high school freshman. I didn't know myself at all. Yet. Since 2004, the Rocky Horror Picture Show has been a huge part of my life. I spent my formative years in the Los Angeles Shadowcast, Sins Are the Flesh, if anyone's familiar, where I made many friends, a treasure trove of memories, and even met the love of my life. He's sitting right there. Filming.
Hi.
And we even did the time warp at our wedding in 2019 alongside many of our former castmates, pictures of which we may or may not see down the road in this here presentation. So I'm here today to give my thoughts about a movie, nay, a cultural phenomenon that I know means a lot to me and has meant so much to many others like me. Yes, a lot of you too. The cultural phenomenon of the Rocky Horror Picture Show paved a revolutionary path for the LGBTQIA+ movement over the last 50 years. And there are myriad indications for how and why it will continue to do so, both in spite and because of important critical discussions inspired by its enduring presence in the cultural zeitgeist. I'll give the quick background with the understanding that a lot of y'all sitting here probably know the ins and outs of it. In 1973, Richard O'Brien wrote the original stage musical, which debuted in London to wide acclaim, overflowing with catchy songs, a storyline paying tribute to science fiction B-movies by way of parody, and lots of amazing costumes. The show is unlike anything that had ever come before it. What's more, it was deeply and unapologetically queer. Not merely queer-coded, but out loud proud and in some ways defiantly so. O'Brien then collaborated with Jim Sharman to write the screenplay for a film adaptation, which premiered in 1975 and was largely a box office flop, but we'll get back to that a little later. Fast forwarding by a few decades, the Rocky Horror Glee Show, if anybody remembers that, aired in October of 2010, sparking viewer curiosity in the referenced film. Whereas the cult following of Rocky Horror was even at that point still mostly underground, the TV episode allowed the decades-long phenomenon to surface, as it were, and bring a new awareness to mainstream audiences. Now, as we all know Fox is wont to do, capitalizing on this enduring subcultural popularity and also trying to rope in a potentially newer and younger audience, in 2016, and almost word for word, Fox TV movie reboot, affectionately dubbed the Rocky Horror Picture Show, Let's Do the Time Warp Again, starring Laverne Cox, among others, it debuted and stirred up even more conversations, leading people to seek out the original source material, and in the process, bringing to light some of the outdated and admittedly problematic material therein. So I'd first like to call your attention to this relic picture here. It's my very first official Rocky Horror diploma and a ticket stub. For my first show back then, we used to print ticket stubs on paper. It's great. Flashing back to the 1970s. So Rocky Horror, it wasn't much by the light of day, but by night. Rocky Horror's first midnight screening took place on April 1st, 1976, at the Waverly Theater in New York's Greenwich Village, a place and a date befitting a film of such emphatic camp sensibility. Later that year, audience members began spontaneously talking back to the film and introducing thrown props later that year. The official Rocky Horror fan club was formed in 1977, led by the late Sal Piro, two absent friends. The film fully embodies the notion of don't dream it, be it, with an overt queerness that inhabits every aspect of the film. Albeit on a tight budget, the film adaptation allowed a lot more room to play with costumes and in particular set design as well. And of course, the high glam and punk-infused aesthetics went hand in hand with the narrative themes of self-discovery, sexual liberation, and queer pride. The environment necessary for Rocky Horror to thrive was one that didn't adhere to societal standards of what's deemed good behavior for a daytime show. For example, you're supposed to sit still and be quiet and watch the movie silently. Rocky Horror proved that the freaks did indeed come out at night and have continued to do so for decades. Midnight screenings therefore created this environment in which those on the fringes of society could fully explore themselves without fear of judgment, ridicule, or harm. A lot of folks attended Rocky Horror in drag for the first time, exploring new sides of sexuality and gender presentation. And it was under this cover of night, in the velvet darkness, that so many young creatives finally found their voices among a supportive community of like-minded souls. Now, there's really interesting dichotomy when it comes to the critical responses that Rocky Horror has received over the last 50 years. And yes, I am extraordinarily proud of this Venn diagram. So it's an interesting dichotomy because over the last 50 years, the way the attitudes about the film have swung essentially from one end to the other. Now, this can be attributed not just to the passage of time, but more importantly to the way that culture and society itself has shifted, leading to more open-minded thinking and also questioning of that which perhaps used to be considered acceptable, but through a modern-day lens no longer is. Upon first blush, Rocky Horror was initially rejected by polite society for its subversive queerness, shocking those who deemed it too extreme. Through a modern-day lens, however, there are those who argue that Rocky Horror isn't progressive enough, citing outdated language, tropes, and characterizations that are, in fact, problematic. In the film itself, there are instances that include, but are not limited to, I'll include a brief trigger warning here, murder, cannibalism, incest, and sexual coercion, among others, which would certainly more than raise eyebrows from first-time and long-time viewers alike. Moreover, there's been a lot of important discussion surrounding the midnight screening experience itself. One often rife with callbacks ranging from mild and comedic to downright in poor taste. Every new generation that discovers Rocky Horror and seeks refuge and community within the subculture makes more room, both to understand and dismantle attitudes of internalized misogyny and sexism that formerly pervaded these events. All this being said, it would be folly to write off the movie in its entirety and disregard the fact that it inspired more than, a mere cult phenomenon. Consider this. Countless other creatives followed the path that was paved for them to move forward, and thus create media that provided better and more thoughtful representations of the queer experience. We can always stand to improve upon that which came before us, so long as we recognize and respect the initial strides made that allowed us to do so. And as a quick note, yes, that is yours truly in the Frank costume. Many representations of Rocky Horror in popular culture present it as a catalyst in coming-of-age stories, wherein the protagonist attends a midnight screening and during the course of events takes a significant step towards becoming more confident and more self-realized. It's time for another audience participation round. Who here has seen or read The Perks of Being a Wallflower? Remember Charlie taking the stage as Rocky for the first time? Now, for those in the crowd who might be a little older, I'm looking at you, husband.
Thank you.
Who's seen Fame? The film Fame, when Doris gets stoned at a midnight screening, runs up on stage ripping open her blouse and doing the time warp again. Now, these are all fictional depictions, obviously, but those do come from somewhere, as they say, you write what you know. Seemingly everyone, at one time or another, at least once in their lives, has either watched the movie and or experienced attending a midnight show. And for those of you sitting here right now, I'll bet it made an impression on you too. And as promised, here's the photo of my husband and I and a sizable handful of our dearest friends doing the time warp again at our wedding. In conclusion, celebrating 50 years of absolute pleasure has never looked better, and a debt of everlasting gratitude is well owed to this iconic film, which itself is a love letter to the misunderstood.